After my husband died, I raised my son alone. But then my mother excluded him from Christmas and treated my support like a monthly duty. I woke up as the clock struck 7 a.m. Sitting up on the single bed, I tried to shake off the lingering fatigue. Beside me, Leo, my 7-year-old son, was still sound asleep, his messy blonde hair spread across the pillow. Looking at him, my heart tightened. It's been almost a year since David, my husband and Leo's father, died in a construction accident. Since then our lives have completely changed. I became a widow at 34, something I never imagined would happen. I work as the head of marketing for a small company, just enough to support the two of us. But the hardest part isn't the job or the finances. It's the loneliness and the burden of raising a child on my own. Fortunately, I have Alice and George, my in-laws. They're wonderful people, always willing to help whenever I need it. Alice often picks Leo up after school so I can focus on work. Every time I go to pick him up, she tries to slip money into my pocket, but I always refuse. Clara, we just want to help, Alice once said, her eyes sincere. We know the insurance payout was generous, but please let us help. I appreciate their kindness deeply. The compensation combined with my income allows us to live fairly comfortably. But what I understand most clearly is that their help isn't just financial, it's filled with love and genuine care. If only my own parents treated Leo and me the same way. Ever since I was little, I've always felt like the stepchild in my own family. My parents always favored my sister Brenda, and now they treat her children the same way. Last week Leo went to visit his maternal grandparents and everything unfolded as usual. He was excited, but after only 20 minutes my mother started complaining. Why does the clock sound so strange? Leo asked, pointing to the old grandfather clock in the living room. How does it work? My mother sighed and rolled her eyes. Clara, can't you tell him to be quiet? He just keeps asking question after question. Brenda's kids never bother anyone like this. My father nodded in agreement and opened his laptop. Leo, go play a game, son. I downloaded some fun ones for you. But Leo doesn't like playing games. He likes to talk, to learn about everything around him. Meanwhile, Brenda's 3 children sat silently in the corner, glued to their phones. To my parents, that's the definition of good behavior. I've gotten used to staying silent in the face of comparisons and criticisms. Since I was young, I learned to suppress my emotions, accepting that I wasn't the favorite child. Every time my parents praised Brenda and criticized me, I just shake my head and stay quiet. At least they still help me occasionally, watching Leo when I work late or picking him up if Alice is busy. One Tuesday evening I went to my parents' house for dinner. The moment I walked in, I knew something was off. My mother had made lasagna, my favorite dish, which she only ever cooks when she's about to ask for something. My father was unusually talkative, asking about work, Leo, and a dozen other things. I knew they were building up to something, but I couldn't guess. Clara, my mother said, carefully slicing her lasagna. We've been meaning to ask you. How much did the insurance pay out after David passed? It felt like a slap. I almost choked on my drink. Maybe it was the shock, or maybe I was just too tired of keeping secrets from them, but I told the truth. Around $300,000. My mother's fork clattered onto her plate. My father snapped his head up so fast I feared he might hurt his neck. They stared at me like I just won the lottery. Is that so? My mother said slowly. And what are you planning to do with that money? I felt the weight settle on my shoulders. I've already invested it, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That money is for Leo's future, for college or maybe a home someday. David and I had planned that together. But that's years from now, my father interjected. You should think about the present. Think about the family. And I knew. The family he spoke of didn't include Leo. You could do a lot with that money, my mother added, leaning in eagerly. Help the family, those who need it now, instead of holding onto it for a future that might never come. I don't want to talk about money anymore, I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. Silence fell over the room. My father's face was filled with disappointment, an expression I knew all too well. My mother pressed her lips together, a clear sign she was angry. Dinner continued in heavy silence, broken only by the clinking of cutlery against plates. I thought that was the end of it. I knew my parents would be upset with me for at least a month, as they always were whenever I didn't do what they wanted. But to my surprise, just a week later my mother called. This Sunday the whole family having dinner together, she said in a voice sweet as honey. Brenda and the kids will be there too. You have to come, sweetheart. I felt uneasy but agreed anyway. That Sunday I arrived at my parents' house with a strange feeling in my chest. Brenda had come early with her 3 kids, all of them glued to their phones as usual. When everyone sat down at the table, Brenda started complaining about rising prices, increasing bills, and how hard life was getting. Everything's just so expensive, she sighed, passing around the mashed potatoes. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue lamenting food prices and the electricity bill. Then Brenda cleared her throat and straightened her back. "I've been thinking," she announced, scanning the table with the confident gaze she's had since we were kids. "Clara and I should help Mom and Dad financially. I'll send $500 a month. I wish I could give more, but Ben's the only one working and I still have to raise the kids." She paused as if building suspense, then turned to me with a fake smile. "And you, Clara, you should send Mom and Dad $1,000 a month." I nearly choked again. "What?" "It makes sense," Brenda continued, her voice calm like she was just presenting a simple equation. "You earn more and only have one child. And well, your situation is a bit more comfortable now." I felt my blood boil. The situation she referred to was David's death, the insurance money I'd set aside for my son's future. I wanted to scream, "I'm a widow. I don't have a partner to share the financial burden anymore." But my mother clapped her hands with joy and my father beamed like he'd just received a Christmas present. "Oh, my sweet daughters," my mom exclaimed. "You don't know how much this means to us." I sat there furious in disbelief. My whole life I had tried to be recognized, to be accepted, and now they were putting a price on love. "All right," I heard myself say. "I'll do it." That first transfer hurt the most. $1,000 vanished from my account with just a few clicks. I told myself, if this buys support from my family, maybe it's worth it. But that illusion faded quickly. "Mom, can you pick up Leo today? Alice has a doctor's appointment and I've got a late meeting." "Oh, I'm sorry, sweetheart," my mom said over the phone. "I've got a headache, you know how my migraines are." It was always something. Every time I needed help, my mother had a reason to say no. Tired, busy, going grocery shopping, back pain. And still the $1,000 kept leaving my account every month. One Thursday afternoon, when my mother once again refused to watch Leo, this time because she might be getting sick, I called Alice, nearly in desperation. "Of course we'll pick him up," Alice said without hesitation. "George is already on his way to school. Leo's telling him all about his science project." I hung up and collapsed into a chair, trying to hold back the tears welling in my eyes. $1,000 a month bought me nothing but excuses, while my mother-in-law would drop everything to help me and never ask for anything. December was approaching. My family always celebrated Christmas at my parents' house. It was tradition. The whole family gathered, exchanging gifts, eating together, making memories. A week before Christmas, my mother called. "Sweet Clara," she began, her voice sugary sweet. "About Christmas Eve. Your father and I want to host an adults-only party this year. No kids this time." I gripped the pen in my hand. It snapped in two. "What?" "We just want to do something a little more elegant this year," she said breezily, as if discussing a change in dessert. "Wine adult conversations, you understand." "But it's Christmas," I protested, stepping away so Leo wouldn't hear. "Where am I supposed to leave Leo?" "Oh, that's simple," my mother said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Just drop him off at Alice and George's. They'll be happy to watch him. You only need to be here at 7. I hung up the phone and looked over at Leo, still focused on his math homework, tongue sticking out in concentration just like David used to do. For the next week I wrestled with myself. Would skipping Christmas with my family be too dramatic? But celebrating it without my son felt too painful. In the end I chose a compromise. I'd leave Leo with Alice and George for a few hours, drop by my parents' house to give gifts and say hello, then head back to spend the real holiday with my in-laws and my son. On Christmas Eve I drove alone to my parents' house, a carefully wrapped gift bag in my hands. The street was packed with cars. Outside I could already hear laughter and Christmas music. I opened the door and the world tilted. The house was full of relatives, but what stunned me were the kids running around the living room wearing paper hats and shrieking with joy. I saw Emily, my cousin's daughter, grabbing cookies near the tree. The more I looked, the clearer it became. Kids were everywhere. Michael's children, Susan's grandchildren. And only one child had been left out. Leo? I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding. Aunt Helen was the first to spot me. "Clara, darling." She rushed over to hug me and looked around. "Where's Leo? Don't tell me he's sick." Before I could answer, Michael chimed in. "Yeah." Jake was excited to show Leo his new chemistry set. Questions began pouring in from all sides. I couldn't speak. Through the crowd I saw my mother arranging cookies on a tray as if everything was completely normal. As if she hadn't excluded Leo from Christmas. "I'm sorry," I whispered, weaving through the guests. "Mom, I need to talk to you. Privately." I pulled her into the hallway, away from the curious stares of our relatives. My heart was still pounding and my fingers were clenched so tight my nails dug into my skin. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You told me this was an adults-only party. You specifically told me not to bring Leo. So why is Brenda's kid here? And all the other kids? What kind of no-kids party is this? My mom adjusted her Christmas sweater and avoided eye contact. Well, this is a different situation. How so? Those kids know how to behave at a formal gathering, she said, gesturing vaguely toward the living room. They're more polite. I stared at her stunned. More polite? Leo is one of the most well-behaved kids I know. His teachers always praise him. Alice and George too. Oh, please, not Alice and George again. My mother cut in, rolling her eyes. They spoil him. Let him ask a million questions non-stop. The other kids know their place. They understand boundaries. Right at that moment a scream erupted from the dining room. Ethan, Brenda's youngest, had just thrown a handful of deviled eggs straight at his sister. The eggs flew across the table and splattered all over Emily's new dress. She screamed. I turned back to my mother, raising an eyebrow. Yes, I can really see how well-behaved the kids are. My mother's face darkened. Kids are supposed to be a little wild. But Leo asks too many questions. It's like he's trying to lecture the adults. Don't make this into a big deal, Clara. It's just a small difference, that's all. I felt something inside me break. Something that had been hurt for far too long and could no longer endure. I'm leaving, I said, turning away. I'm going home to Leo. My mother shrugged, her eyes fixed on her bright red nails. Suit yourself. But don't forget to leave the gift bag under the tree, we'll open them after dinner. I stopped, looked at her one last time, then walked back into the living room. I cleared my throat loudly. The chatter faded. All eyes turned to me. Some of you have asked why I came alone tonight, I began, my voice louder than I expected. Why Leo isn't here for the family's Christmas party. Brenda stepped toward me, maybe to stop me, but I held up a hand. Let me finish. I came alone because a week ago my mother called and told me this was an adults-only party. She told me I couldn't bring Leo. Murmurs rippled through the room. Helen's jaw dropped. What? But there are kids everywhere. We weren't told anything about kids not being allowed, Uncle Paul added, staring at my mother in disbelief. My mother awkwardly stepped forward. Clara, now's not the time. No, Mom, I said, eyes locked on hers. Now is exactly the time. Because this isn't an adults-only party. It's a party that excludes one child, my child. The murmuring grew louder. I saw the stunned looks, the disappointed head shakes aimed at my parents. But that's not even the worst part, one said with a quiet, humorless laugh. While my son was being left out of Christmas, I was expected to send my parents $1,000 a month. Brenda? She was supposed to send $500. Ben, Brenda's husband, looked up like he'd been shocked with electricity. Wait. $500? Brenda's face went pale. Ben turned to her, confused. Where would you be sending $500 from? We barely manage rent every month. Brenda stammered, her face flushing red. I never actually sent anything. I looked at her, no longer feeling even a shred of pity. They asked Brenda to lie. Told her to say she was contributing so I'd feel like I had to do my part too. They said if I believed she was paying I'd agree. Silence. Utter silence. I watched as the truth sank into everyone's faces. The scattered pieces came together into a full picture, one where my parents had deceived me, used me like an ATM while excluding my child. Aunt Susan spoke, her voice trembling with rage. You used your own daughter for money, then cast out your grandson from the family? That's unthinkable, disgraceful. The room erupted. Voices raised, demanding answers, calling out my parents. Ben turned on Brenda, furious, questioning her. My parents stood frozen, their perfect family facade collapsing before them. I raised my hand again, everyone fell silent. There's one more thing I want to say. All eyes turned to me again. My parents stood by the Christmas tree, pale as ghosts. Brenda was still trying to explain herself to Ben. From this moment on, I said, my voice calm like passing a sentence, I won't be sending another dollar to either of you. And I will no longer maintain any relationship with you or with Brenda. I'm done. I turned, placed the gift bag by the door, and walked out of the house I once called home. The door closed behind me with a final thud, the period to a chapter one should have ended long ago. I sat in the car for a long while, hands resting on the steering wheel, heart still trembling. The night air was freezing, but inside me was a strange warmth, a feeling I hadn't had in years. Relief. I unlocked my phone and opened the banking app. With just a few simple steps I canceled the monthly transfer to my mother's account. One tap, one confirmation, as if I had just broken the invisible chain that had been dragging me for the past year. The road back to Alice and George's felt both long and incredibly short. As I pulled into their driveway, I saw Leo through the kitchen window standing by the counter helping Alice decorate cookies. Warm yellow light glowed on his tousled blonde hair. He was smiling. A full carefree smile. My eyes stung. That evening we stayed with Alice and George. We baked cookies, sang a few silly carols, then rearranged the nativity scene that Leo had put in the wrong order. George explained each figure in the Christmas story and Leo asked question after question. And no one, not a single person, told him he was being a bother. That's when I realized this is what family is. Not blood. But the people who choose you. Who chooses your child. The next morning, while Leo was still fast asleep among a pile of Santa's presents, my phone rang. It was Aunt Susan. You should hear what happened after you left, she said, skipping any pleasantries. As soon as you walked out, it was like a dam broke. Uncle Robert stood up and said he couldn't stay another minute. Then Helen left. Then Paul. People started walking out one after another. Some even told your parents to their faces that they were con artists. That they were a disgrace to the family. I listened in silence. Aunt Susan continued, her voice angry on my behalf. Ben was furious. He packed up the kids' things right then and told Brenda he needed time to think about their marriage. Last night he took them to his parents' house. I closed my eyes. A part of me felt sad for what Brenda had caused, but mostly I just felt right. All of this should have come out a long time ago. I want you to know, Aunt Susan added, her voice softening. We're on your side. What they did to you and Leo, it's unforgivable. I thanked her, then hung up. Right after, the messages came flooding in from my mother, my father and Brenda. All saying the same thing. We're sorry, we were wrong, please talk to us, let us explain. I read each one. Then quietly moved them to the archive. I didn't reply. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed like a gentle breeze. Leo and I stayed with Alice and George, playing board games, watching movies, baking. Nothing extravagant, nothing loud, just pure genuine warmth. The new year has arrived. On the morning of the 31st, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw my parents standing on the porch holding a large gift box wrapped in shiny paper. My heart thudded. Not from fear, but because I wasn't sure whether I should even open the door. Clara, we know you're home, my mother's voice called sweetly from outside. So sweet it made my skin crawl. We just want to talk. I opened the door but blocked the entry. I kept my distance. They looked smaller. The power they once held was gone. Maybe because for the first time I wasn't the obedient daughter standing silently while they lectured. We brought this for Leo, my father said, holding the box out to me. One glance at the wrapping and I knew it was some expensive piece of electronics. Leo doesn't need it, I replied, not taking the gift. Clara, my mother stepped forward. We know we were wrong about how we treated Leo about the money. We truly regret it. And we want you to know this isn't about money, we really feel sorry. I looked at them. Carefully. Searching for truth in their eyes. Are you sorry because you realize you were truly wrong, or because the whole family found out and turned against you? I asked, unblinking. They looked at each other, just one glance. And I had my answer. I think you should go, I said gently. I don't believe you. And I don't trust you anymore. But we're family, my mother nearly pleaded, her eyes brimming with tears. No, I shook my head. Families don't use each other. Family doesn't deceive their daughter for money. Family doesn't exclude a child from Christmas. They stepped back, clutching the gift box, then quietly turned and walked away. I watched until their car disappeared past the gate. I didn't feel sad. I just felt free. Months later I still stood by my decision. No texts, no calls. Brenda tried to reach out too, but I had blocked her number. The money I used to send every month I now transfer into Leo's college fund. And the strange thing is, when you cut out toxic people, you make room for healthy, beautiful relationships to grow. Aunt Susan started inviting us over for Sunday dinners. Uncle Robert hosted BBQs and Leo got to play with his cousins. People asked genuine questions, listened to Leo and encouraged his endless curiosity. Mom, why does Uncle Robert's pool smell weird? Leo asked one summer afternoon. That's the smell of chlorine, kiddo, Uncle Robert answered before I could then launched into a whole explanation about sanitization and chemical reactions, and Leo was absolutely fascinated. I watched my son bloom like a tree finally being watered with real love. No one told him he was too much, no one told him to stop asking questions. Leo started calling Alice and George grandma and grandpa, something I had never asked him to do. They had become our safe harbor. And now I knew. Family isn't where you're born, it's where people choose to love you like you belong. And me, I finally made the right choice.